Welcome to the 7th Scouching Report. Today we're going to be looking at Sioux Falls Stampede defenseman Ryan Johnson. Johnson is a moderately sized defenseman who plays a pretty well-rounded game, and he's ranked 33rd amongst North American skaters. I think what Ryan Johnson brings to the game is a very interesting version of a modern defensive defenseman. He's not the biggest dude, he isn't entirely focused on hits, but at the same time there isn't a ton of real offensive flash to his game. But that does not mean that I don't think he's going to be an effective NHLer one day. So if this is your first time watching a Scouching report, the way that we break down a player is with 5 different categories: think, move, get, pass, and shoot. Within those categories, we give a number and a letter grade, where the number represents the general tier the player plays within, with the letter indicating the overall level of consistency that the player is in that tier of talent. So to get things started, we look at the think category, which is how does Ryan Johnson perceive the game? As I mentioned before, I see Ryan Johnson's potential as more of a defensive defenseman. What he brings to the game is a sense of pace control. He can control the pace of the game with the puck on his stick, and when he's away from the puck, he has a very, very good ability to stay in position defensively, breaking up breakouts and staying just well positioned to prevent chances against. When you think defensive defenseman, sometimes you might think bad skating, but in Ryan Johnson's case, he's actually a very talented skater with excellent edge work. The name of Ryan Johnson's game is evasiveness with the puck, and when he's away from the puck, he focuses on choking off breakouts and getting possession back. He is capable from time to time of jumping into the offensive zone for dangerous chances, but that's not really his game. His game is get the puck back and calm the game down, make the first pass out of the zone so you can move the puck back up the ice. And to me, that does carry a lot of value. So he's not often caught out of position. He's not often the flashiest type of player in the offensive zone. So in terms of thinking the game, he does seem to be pretty reliable. On the other hand, there are many, many times where that is simply not the case. I've seen instances of Ryan Johnson clearly getting caught out of position, and the amount of intensity that he brings to get back into position to stay defensively stable just is not there. I've also caught him chasing a hit that does put him out of position and getting really carried away going after that physical contact and getting burned for it. He can also get caught trying to do a little bit too much, especially along the boards, moving the puck up the ice, and really kind of ignoring his teammates trying to do too much himself. And when things like that don't really go his way, I've caught him a few times pulling off some stuff that if I'm a coach, I'm not the biggest fan of. Slashing guys who have knocked him down. He punched a guy in the head once who knocked him down. It's just some stuff that you might not want him to do at the next level of hockey. So I don't really see a super high level cerebral defenseman there, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's not a lot of consistency with regards to what he brings to the game, but he's the type of player that I don't think you can have too many of. He tries to keep the game calm, slowed down, at his own pace. He can choke off offenses pretty well just if he focuses on staying in position and not chasing contact too much. So overall in the think category, I'm giving Ryan Johnson a 2D. There's a decent thinking defenseman here if he can keep his head on straight and if he can stay focused and stay intense on the puck at all times. He seems to perceive the game at an okay level. I'd say it's good enough, but there are glaring weaknesses to his awareness of where the puck is around him and how intense he needs to be on loose pucks to pick them up again, or just as simple as using your teammates effectively, or at least as effectively as possible, because I do find that he does create a lot more trouble for himself than he should. The next category we look at is the move category, which is basically Ryan Johnson's skating and puck scalability. Johnson is a relatively smooth skater. I don't see a tremendous amount of speed there, at least not a lot of the time, but there are periods where he's known to turn it up, especially when he has the puck on his stick, and he can really carry a puck really effectively up the ice. But his biggest strength in this move category is when the puck is on his stick and he's using his stick to stick handle. It's really remarkable to see if there's a forechecker pressuring him how easily he can just get around that player without really having to move his feet very much. He's very shifty on his feet and he can escape pressure pretty easily, and it's really something to watch. And I think in terms of just evading pressure and calming games down, there aren't very many other defensemen in this draft that I would really put more faith in. And when Johnson has the puck along the boards, he can cycle it really effectively on his own stick. His rotational mobility is really, really special, and it just helps round out a really nice skating and puck skill package that I think is going to take him a long way at the next level. On the other hand, there are times where he does get carried away. He's trying one too many turns in the corner with the puck, and he straight up wipes out. I've seen it happen a few times, and I think that with more training and more time, he's going to become a better skater. And I do see him rushing pucks up the ice, and sometimes it is really special to watch. He just doesn't do it all that often. So again, there's inconsistency here, but I think that if he can focus his game and just simplify things and play an all-around simpler game, I think he's going to be interesting to watch. So in the move category, I'm giving him a 2B. Again, sometimes you see flashes of a really effective puck-rushing defenseman, and he is a bit of a faster skater at his top speed than I've seen from some of the other guys in his draft cohort, but it isn't always there. The puck skill always is there, and that's really, really great to see, and I think that's going to help. The next category is the get category. Essentially, how does Ryan Johnson behave getting the puck back from opponents? So first things first, he does one thing extremely well, and that's break up breakouts. There's nobody that I've tracked this year so far that has done a better job at preventing controlled zone entries and exits against him. When the puck is coming his way, no one is doing a better job preventing that control and gaining control back. Of all transitions against him, just 30% were done under control. That is significantly fewer than all of the other defensemen that I've tracked by a very, very wide margin. And it's not that he's just using his stick to do it either. He does a very good job with his body positioning to not necessarily hit guys, but just gain physical advantages on them. He knows how to get around players to get pucks off them. He can hit players if he needs to, and as I mentioned before, he can get caught chasing hits a little bit too much. But in transition, whether it's with his body or with his stick, he does either very, very well, and I think in terms of that sense of a defensive defenseman, he's really far along in his development. I think it's going to help him a lot, and especially if he's paired with a bit more of an aggressive defender, you could have a very interesting pair on whatever team you're on. On the negative side, I've seen him caught a bit flat-footed, really high in the defensive zone, and that's not really where you want to be as a defenseman. Worse yet, when he does get caught flat-footed like that, I've seen him a couple of times really have one of those controller disconnected moments where he just kind of glides back to cover for the mistake he just made. And again, coming back to that awareness and that getting yourself into trouble mentality, that's something that might drive coaches a little bit nuts, but that is something that I think he can cut down on over the years. So in the get category, I'm giving him a 1D. Now, the 1 really just comes from how good he is at preventing control and just ending breakouts where they started. It's really special with him, especially relative to the other players I've tracked. The D comes in from some really mystifying stuff trying to get pucks back in his own end. He'll be puck watching, he'll just stand there, he'll glide back into his own zone a bit when there's an odd man rush. It's a little bit concerning on that end. And sometimes when there's loose pucks, there's just a mystifying lack of intensity. Situations where all he needs to do to keep pucks in the offensive zone, for example, are just poke the puck to his teammate, but what ends up happening is a forechecking forward from the other team will just poke the puck past him and then have an odd man rush going down the ice. The next category is the pass category. Now, Ryan Johnson passing the puck is an interesting case. He's not the most unreliable passer, but he's not the perfect passer out there. And compared to previous defensemen I've tracked like Zach Jones and Dominic Fensori, he's not doing a lot of really dangerous passing in the offensive zone, so I don't think that's really his future. I think the future for him really comes from just playing that calm defensive game and making that first pass to get out of his own zone. He does do a very good job at making sure that defensive exits and offensive entries are done under control, so that's very promising. Where he gets himself into trouble with passing is when he tries to do too much. His stretch passing wasn't great, or at least it's not projectable to the next level. His offensive zone passing, if it wasn't along the boards, it wasn't particularly reliable. But again, this isn't meant to sound like it's all a bad thing. He's more of a conservative passer, and that's perfectly reasonable, and that's something that coaches are going to really, really like. If he sees his open man, he'll probably try to get it to that open man. There are times, as I mentioned before, where he can try to do too much and try to do too much on his own, but if he learns to start using his teammates as often as he possibly can and just calming games down and moving pucks back up the ice at their own pace, then I think he's going to be successful. So in the pass category, I'm giving Johnson a 2C. Again, not a super high level passer here, but he is reliable, and reliability is key when you have a defenseman like this. He can get pucks back, he can create space for himself, but if he can't pass the puck, that's a problem. Luckily, Johnson can pass the puck pretty well. The issue is that sometimes when he does get put under a lot of pressure and he can't escape that pressure, he can make bad passes, and some have been so bad that they directly result in goals against, and that is something that will need to be refined, and I think the route towards refining it comes down to just simplifying the game. Going cross ice, stretch passes up the ice. To him, I think those are no-nos, but that's not a bad thing. He just needs to know how to move a puck effectively and safely. The last category we look at is the shoot category. Now, Ryan Johnson is not the biggest shooting defenseman I've ever seen. Again, he's mostly a defensive defenseman who relies on transition rather than putting pucks on net himself. Over the course of the whole regular season, he averaged about 1 shot per game, which for a defenseman isn't tremendously huge, but across the games that I tracked, he beat every defenseman that I tracked in shot attempts. So in terms of getting pucks to the net, I think that's more his approach as opposed to trying to put pucks in the net. So there isn't really a ton to write home about here for Ryan Johnson. Again, I don't think this is his game. However, there were some flashes of Johnson taking pucks deep into the offensive zone and just kind of hanging around in there to try to get high and medium danger shots. There was a few of those that I saw, but it really wasn't all that common. So in the shoot category, I'm giving Ryan Johnson a 2B. He doesn't get the puck on net very much, and he's not scoring a ton of goals for a defenseman. But he is clearly attempting a lot of shots, and the other thing is he wasn't really used a ton on the power play from what I saw. In fact, Sioux Falls tended to rely on him during penalty kills more than anything, which for projectability's sake really shows me something different, and there might be a case for him to be a good penalty killer at the next level if he can keep that get category style of play up really high. But when it comes to putting pucks on net, he seems more than willing to do so, and when he is pinching in the offensive zone, he's more than willing to try to get scoring chances for himself if he's covered for. So the way that we wrap up these videos is we look at the best part of a player's game, the good part of a player's game, and the not so good part of a player's game. The best part of Ryan Johnson's game was his ability to stop breakouts and break up offensive possessions. In case you haven't watched the other Scouching reports or have forgotten, Zach Jones allowed more controlled transitions against at about a 33% higher rate. Dominic Fensori was around 70% more, and Cam York was about 80% more. It's really crazy how good Ryan Johnson is at just stopping breakouts against him. So if you're looking for a really modern defensive defenseman who has a lot of mobility and a lot of puck skill, but their specialty is more of the defensive side of the game, Ryan Johnson could be a really interesting player for you to draft and track over the next little while. I alluded to this earlier, but the good part of his game is his puck skill and evasiveness. It's really special. While standing still, he's able to evade players really, really well, and that's the first thing that jumped out at me, and actually the one thing that made me want to track him way back at the beginning of the season. He has a great ability to slow the game down, and in a time where hockey is characterized by speed and skill, it's very interesting to see what happens when you have a very skilled player who can also play skilled at very low speeds. And when you couple that with his skating ability that he can turn up to 11 if he really needs to, there's an interesting player who I think is going to be an efficient defensive defender who is going to eat a lot of minutes in the NHL one day. The not so good part of Johnson's game really stems from his awareness and consistency. There were some games that were much, much better than others on his part, and there were even some shifts in the same game that were much better than others. And yeah, that might be something you expect watching any hockey player. Some things are better than others, but in Johnson's case, some of the differences were really staggering. Those controller disconnected moments happened quite a bit. Those moments where he loses track of what's going on in the play or just how quickly a forechecker is approaching him, it happened quite a lot. And it really feels like there needs to be some refinements made and a lot of coaching help done over the next little while for him to really refine things and simplify his game. But the bottom line is, if he can capture the flashes of really solid play that he shows, I think he's going to be very effective down the line. So overall, I'm giving Ryan Johnson a 2C. The main focus of his game is getting and maintaining puck possession one way or the other and controlling the pace of play. He's a real meat and potatoes defender, and if I'm drafting in this year's draft and I want to build a team, I go after an aggressive defender that one day I could play with him. Someone like Dominic Fensori. I think those two guys could make a very interesting pair down the line if you manage to get both in the same draft. His awareness of the play and his overall consistency does need work, but this is somewhat common for some players, and it can make or break your career, but I think it's worth betting on for someone who is so effective with all of those downsides. His offensive upside may be a little bit limited, but where he will generate a lot of points if he simplifies his game is just from playing with a lot of possession. If you put him on the ice, you can bet that your team is likely to have the puck more than the opposing team, and there might be some offense that just comes out of that inherently. And I'll close the video with something I want to dig into before the public kind of starts digging into it for me. I've tracked 4 defensemen thus far, and 3 are now 2Cs: Zach Jones, Dominic Fensori, and Ryan Johnson. And I want to clarify that all 3 of those players are 2Cs for very different reasons. In Zach Jones's case, it mostly stemmed from an inconsistency in style of play. I thought he was a very good defender with a lot of upside. It just seemed that from shift to shift or game to game, he would switch between being a puck-rushing defenseman, a puck-moving defenseman, a defensive defenseman. It kind of felt like he was trying a lot of different things, or he was being coached to try a lot of different things, and there wasn't a lot of refinement to his game, and from that there was a lot of inconsistency. In Dominic Fensori's case, the rating came from just inherently based on his size. The limitations put on him based on how big he is really make it difficult to project where he's going to be at the end of the day. I do see a lot of upside, but there are situations where players that small will have a lot of trouble being effective when the game gets faster and bigger. Whereas Ryan Johnson really comes the closest to legitimate inconsistency within one style of play. He's a pretty prototypical modern defensive defenseman. He's the kind of guy who's able to control pace, break up possessions, get possession back, move pucks effectively, but a lot of the times there's inconsistency even within those traits. So overall, that's where that 2C comes from, and it is quite different from the other previous cases. So that's it for the 7th Scouching report. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, you can click all the buttons you see below me so that you never miss another video. If you really liked the show, you could consider supporting us on Patreon, where you get access to private chat rooms, spreadsheets for data for drafted and undrafted prospects, as well as other goodies. Or you could try supporting us at the Scouchwear shop, where 50% of all profits go to the Women's Sports Fund. So that's all for now, and we'll see you in the next one.